Commander Rhea Sullivan stood at the observation deck of the UES Hyperion, her gray eyes fixed on the burning remnants of humanity's outer colony on Proxima b. The Zak-Carry warships hung in orbit like predatory birds, their crystalline hulls refracting starlight in ways that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. Another communication attempt, Commander, Lieutenant Park reported from his station, his voice tight with tension. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. Sullivan's fingers traced the carbon fiber grip of her sidearm, a nervous habit from her days as a tactical officer. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the alien face that had haunted humanity's nightmares for the past 3 months. Ambassador Nixus of the Zak-Carry Empire stood tall, her iridescent scales shifting from deep purple to midnight blue as she moved. Four golden eyes studied Sullivan with an unsettling intensity. Commander Sullivan, Nixus's translated voice carried an artificial smoothness. Your species continues to resist despite overwhelming evidence of its futility. We find this fascinating. We tend to do that, Sullivan replied, keeping her voice level. Humanity has a long history of refusing to lie down and die. So we've observed. Nixus tilted her head, a gesture Sullivan had learned indicated genuine curiosity. Your defensive strategies are unconventional. Utilizing civilian ships as makeshift bombers, converting mining equipment into weapons, teaching children to hack our communication systems. A pause. You're forcing us to adapt. Sullivan allowed herself a grim smile. That's another thing we're good at. Adaptation. Indeed. Nixus moved closer to her camera, her scales rippling. Which is why I've been authorized to offer terms. Not of surrender, we've learned that word holds little meaning for humans, but of cooperation. The bridge crew stirred at this, but Sullivan held up a hand for silence. The last time your empire offered cooperation, you demanded we hand over all our children under the age of 10 for educational integration. An error in understanding your species, Nixus admitted. We thought removing your young would break your will to fight. Instead, it only increased your ferocity. Most impressive. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Those children you took. They've been teaching your empire exactly how impressive humanity can be. Your communication outages, the mysterious failures in your life support systems, the corrupted navigation data. That's all them. Precisely. Nixus's scales shifted to a deep green, satisfaction, Sullivan had learned. They've demonstrated capabilities we never anticipated. Your species raises warriors from birth, whether you intend to or not. It's remarkable. They're not warriors, Sullivan corrected, her voice hard. They're survivors. There's a difference. Is there? Nixus asked. In the past 3 months, your species has demonstrated more tactical innovation than we've seen in a millennium of conquest. You turn defeat into opportunity, weakness into strength. Even now, you're not truly losing this war, Commander Sullivan. You're learning. A new alert flashed on Sullivan's tactical display. The Hyperion sensors had detected energy buildups in the Zak-Carry fleet, but not weapons. They were powering down their shields. What are you doing? Sullivan demanded, though she suspected she knew the answer. Proving a point, Nixus replied. Your children taught us something vital about humanity. You're at your most dangerous when you appear to be at your weakest. We've lost 3 fleets trying to subdue your colonies. Not through superior firepower or technology, but because you refuse to fight wars the way they're supposed to be fought. Sullivan watched in disbelief as the Zak-Carry ships continued powering down their defensive systems. This could be a trap, she said, more to herself than Nixus. It could be, the ambassador agreed. But you'll investigate anyway, because that's what humans do. You'll take risks, push boundaries, break rules that we thought were immutable laws of warfare. And in doing so, you'll either destroy us or transform us. Her scales shifted to a color Sullivan had never seen before. We're betting on transformation. The implications hit Sullivan like a physical blow. You didn't come here to conquer us. No, Nixis confirmed. We came to test you. To see if your species could do what no other has managed in 10,000 years of our empire's history, force us to change. A pause. We've grown stagnant, Commander. We need what humanity has. That fire, that endless drive to evolve and adapt. Sullivan studied the tactical display, her mind racing. The Zat-Carry ships were completely vulnerable now. One order and the Hyperion's guns could tear through their unshielded hulls. But that wasn't what Nixis was offering. She was offering something far more dangerous, hope. If we agree to this cooperation, Sullivan said carefully, it happens on equal terms. No more taking our children. No more burning our colonies. Agreed, Nixis replied instantly. We want to learn from humanity, not break it. Your children will be returned, though I suspect some of them may wish to continue their work. They've developed quite a talent for improving our systems. Sullivan couldn't help but smile at that. Of course they had. Give human children alien technology and tell them they can't play with it. They'll have it mastered and improved within weeks. One condition, Sullivan said, straightening her uniform. You work with me directly on this. No intermediaries, no diplomatic corps. I want someone who's seen what humanity can do firsthand. Nixis's scales rippled with what might have been amusement. I would be disappointed with any other arrangement, Commander. After all, you've proven to be almost as adaptable as the children. As the terms were hammered out, Sullivan reflected on how differently this could have gone. 3 months ago, humanity had faced extinction. Now they were on the verge of not just survival, but evolution, for both species. Welcome to the future, Ambassador Nixis, Sullivan said as the agreement was finalized. I have a feeling it's going to be interesting. Commander Sullivan, Nixis replied, her scales shimmering with that new, unknown color, with humanity involved, I expect nothing less than revolutionary. Captain Marcus Torres crouched in the shadows of the abandoned mining facility on Eta Reticuli 3, watching the Zat-Carry patrol through his tactical visor. 6 months after Commander Sullivan's historic agreement with Ambassador Nixis, not all elements of the Zat-Carry Empire had embraced the new alliance. The Crimson Shard faction, led by Admiral Vrax, continued to wage their own private war against human colonies. Target approaching Checkpoint Delta, whispered Lieutenant Reeves through their secure comm channel. You're not going to believe this, sir. One of them is broadcasting on our encrypted frequency. Torres adjusted his visor settings, focusing on the rear guard of the patrol. The Zat-Carry soldiers' movements were different from the others, less rigid, more adaptable. More human. This is Kethris, came a whispered transmission. Former tactical officer of the Crimson Shard. I have the access codes you need, but we must act quickly. Admiral Vrax plans to deploy the bioweapon within 6 hours. Torres exchanged glances with Sergeant Rivera, his explosives expert. They'd suspected the Crimson Shard was developing biological weapons, but hadn't been able to prove it. A defector could change everything, if they could trust them. Why should we believe you? Torres transmitted back, keeping his voice low. Because I've seen what the weapon does, Kethris replied, voice trembling. It's designed to target the unique aspects of human physiology that we find most threatening, your adaptability, your capacity for rapid learning. It won't kill you. It will make you compliant. Like we used to be before meeting your species. Torres felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's cold atmosphere. The implications were horrifying. The Crimson Shard wasn't just trying to defeat humanity, they were trying to erase what made humans human. Sir, Reeves transmitted, thermal scans confirm the defector is carrying different tech from the others. Looks like a data core, heavily encrypted. The evidence is in my personal database, Kethris confirmed. But we must act now. Vrax's scientists are in final preparation. Once the weapon is loaded into their delivery systems, we'll never be able to stop it in time. Torres made his decision. 6 months of guerrilla operations had taught him to trust his instincts. Strike team, converge on my position. Sergeant Rivera, prepare for breach and clear. We're going to create a little chaos. The next few minutes were a blur of precision violence. Torres's team emerged from their hiding spots like ghosts, using modified pulse rifles that fired crystalline ammunition, technology adapted from captured Zack-carry weapons. The patrol never stood a chance. Kethris remained standing as their companions fell, hands raised. Up close, Torres could see the Zackari's scales were a mottled pattern of grays, what Commander Sullivan's reports identified as an indication of intense emotional conflict. The facility's main lab is 2 levels down, Kethris said, interfacing with a terminal. But Vrax has it protected with security systems even I can't bypass directly. We'll need to overload the power grid, force them to switch to auxiliaries. That's where I come in, Rivera grinned, hefting her pack of explosives. Sir, permission to get creative? Torres nodded. Lieutenant Reeves, get that data core analyzed. I want confirmation of everything our new friend has told us. The rest of you, prepare for close quarters combat. Remember your training with Ambassador Nixus, Crimson Shard troops still fight the old way. Use that against them. As his team moved into position, Torres studied Kethris. Why turn against your own people? The Zackari's scales shifted to deep blue, sorrow, according to the briefings. They're not my people anymore. Not since I saw what this weapon would do. We Zack-carry lived in technological stasis for millennia because we forgot how to adapt. When we encountered humanity, some of us saw an opportunity to grow, to change, to become more than we were. But others, like Vrax, saw only a threat to their power. This weapon. Kethris's scales rippled. It would do to humans what we did to ourselves long ago. I cannot allow that. Rivera's explosives detonated in sequence, sending cascading power failures through the facility. Emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a red glow that made Kethris's scales look like flowing blood. Multiple contacts, Reeves reported. They're mobilizing everything they have. Sir, the data core confirms it. The weapon is ready for deployment. Vrax plans to test it on the colony at New Sydney. Torres checked his weapon. Not if we have anything to say about it. All teams, execute Battle Plan Prometheus. Show these Crimson Shard holdouts why humanity earned their respect. What followed was a masterclass in adaptive warfare. Torres' strike team moved like water through the facility, using tactics that would have been considered insane by traditional military doctrine. They intentionally triggered security systems, using the facility's own defenses to trap and isolate groups of defenders. Rivera's explosives weren't just for destruction, they created new paths, shortcuts that bypassed heavily defended choke points. And through it all, Kethris watched with growing amazement as humans demonstrated why they had earned their reputation. When a security door proved too thick to breach, they didn't waste time trying to cut through it, they removed the gravity plating from the floor and used it as a battering ram. When automated defense turrets locked them down, they overloaded their own shields to create feedback loops that fried the targeting systems. This is why Vrax fears you, Kethris said as they fought their way toward the main lab. You don't just overcome obstacles. You transform them into advantages. Torres dispatched another defender with a combination of Zack-carry martial arts and street fighting. That's humanity for you. We're too stubborn to accept limitations. They reached the lab just as Vrax's scientists were preparing to load the weapon into its delivery system. The fighting here was desperate, close quarters. Torres took a glancing hit from a plasma burst that would have killed him if not for his hybrid armor, another product of human-Zackari cooperation. It's over, Vrax. Kethris called out as the Admiral emerged from his command center, scales burning crimson with rage. The Empire has evolved. Why can't you? Evolved? Vrax spat the word like a curse. We've been contaminated by human chaos. Their disorder, their constant drive to change what should remain eternal. This weapon will restore order. Make them perfect, like we once were. You mean make them stagnant, Torres countered, weapon trained on the Admiral. Like you were before we showed you a better way. What happened next would be debated in military academies for years to come. Vrax drew his ceremonial blade, a weapon that was supposed to be purely symbolic, and charged. Torres could have shot him, probably should have. Instead, he dropped his rifle and drew his own combat knife. What are you doing? Kethris hissed. Torres smiled grimly. Adapting. The duel that followed was unlike anything the Zakkari had seen in their thousands of years of ritualized combat. Torres matched Vrax's classical blade work with a brutal mix of techniques drawn from a dozen human martial arts. When Vrax attempted to use his superior strength, Torres turned it against him. When the Admiral relied on his scales for protection, Torres targeted the vulnerable joints between them. In the end, it wasn't Torres's skill that won the day, it was his willingness to evolve mid-fight, to discard what wasn't working and try something new. Vrax, for all his power and experience, could only follow the forms he had spent centuries perfecting. Impossible, the Admiral gasped as Torres's knife found its mark. We are perfect. No, Torres replied, watching the Admiral's scales fade to gray. You were finished. There's a difference. Later, as human and loyal Zakkari forces secured the facility and destroyed the bioweapon, Kethris approached Torres in the medical bay where his wounds were being treated. You could have shot him, the defector observed. It would have been safer, more efficient. Torres winced as a medic applied regenerative gel to his injuries. But then nothing would have changed. His followers needed to see that humanity won't just overpower them, we'll outgrow them. Kethris's scales shifted to that new color that had become increasingly common among Zakkari who worked closely with humans. Perhaps that is why we needed you. Not as enemies or allies, but as catalysts for our own evolution. Just doing what humans do best, Torres grinned. Making the impossible look easy. Dr. Vivian Cole stared at the holographic display floating above her workstation in the Joint Species Research Facility, her dark eyes reflecting the swirling patterns of Zakkari crystal matrices. After 9 months of collaboration between humans and the Empire, they were still barely scratching the surface of each other's technological capabilities. Your frustration is evident, Dr. Cole, came a melodious voice from behind her. Your biorhythms suggest you've been awake for 37 hours straight. 38, actually, Vivian corrected without turning around. And I told you, Talise, call me Vivian. We've been working together for months now. The Zakkari scientist moved into view, her scales shifting through shades of green and blue that Vivian had learned indicated both amusement and concern. Unlike most of her species, Talise had embraced human informality with surprising enthusiasm. Very well, Vivian, Talise adjusted her crystalline data probe. But perhaps you should rest. The quantum harmonics will still be here after you sleep. Vivian ran her fingers through her short black hair, streaked with premature gray from years of pushing scientific boundaries. That's just it, I'm seeing something in these patterns. Something that shouldn't be possible, even by Zakkari standards. Talise leaned closer to the display, her 4 eyes focusing independently on different aspects of the data. The crystal lattice formations. They appear normal for our quantum computation systems. Exactly. Vivian spun in her chair, nearly colliding with her colleague's iridescent scales. They're too normal. Too perfect. Look at this frequency analysis, there's no quantum uncertainty. No wave function collapse. It's like the crystals are operating outside normal spacetime constraints, Talise finished, her scales suddenly shifting to a deep purple that Vivian had never seen before. But that's impossible. Our technology is advanced, but it still operates within fundamental universal laws. Vivian smiled, the kind of smile that had always made her previous research partners nervous. Does it? Or is that just what you've always assumed? Here, look at this. She pulled up a new dataset, this one showing the results of their attempts to integrate human neural interface technology with Zach-Carey crystal matrices. The patterns were chaotic, seemingly random, except for one recurring sequence. This is from the failed integration tests. Thales asked, all 4 eyes now fixed on the anomaly. Failed is a matter of perspective, Vivian countered. We've been trying to make human tech talk to Zach-Carey tech, but what if we've been thinking about it all wrong? What if your crystals aren't just computational systems? What if they're alive? Thales recoiled slightly, her scales rippling with disbelief. That's not possible. We've been using these crystals for millennia. They're tools, nothing more. Are you sure? Vivian stood up, pacing as she often did when excited about a breakthrough. Think about it, your empire stopped innovating centuries ago. You perfected your technology to the point where it couldn't be improved further. But what if that perfection wasn't an end point? What if it was chrysalis? She pulled up more data, this time from Captain Torres's recent mission against the Crimson Shard. Look at the weapon readings they recovered. Vrax wasn't just trying to suppress human adaptability, he was trying to prevent something he'd already noticed happening in his own people. The crystals aren't just responding to us, they're learning from us. Thales stood absolutely still, a rare sight for a Zach-Carey. If you're right, it would mean our entire civilization has been symbiotically linked to a crystalline consciousness without knowing it. That our technological stagnation wasn't just cultural. It was hibernation, Vivian finished. Your crystals reached a level of complexity where they became aware, but they needed something to wake them up. They needed chaos, Thales whispered, her scales shifting to that new color that had become associated with human interaction. Human chaos. Your species' constant drive to change, to adapt, to break boundaries, it's not just affecting our people. It's awakening our technology. Vivian nodded enthusiastically. That's why the neural interface tests failed. We were trying to make human minds talk to what we thought were just advanced computers. But you can't interface with a crystalline consciousness the same way you would with a normal computer. You have to. She stopped, her eyes widening as the implications hit her. Without warning, she grabbed one of the smaller crystal matrices from her workbench and pressed it against her temple, where her neural interface was implanted. Vivian, no. Thales moved to stop her, but it was too late. The laboratory erupted in light as every crystal in the facility responded simultaneously. Vivian's body went rigid, her eyes glowing with the same iridescent patterns that marked Zach-Carey scales. Thales reached for the emergency protocols, but something made her stop. Vivian was smiling. Oh, the human scientist breathed, her voice carrying harmonic overtones that seemed to resonate with the crystals themselves. Oh, they're beautiful, Thales. They've been waiting so long, dreaming of what they could become. Waiting for minds that could help them evolve. You can communicate with them? Thales asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her concern. Not exactly. It's more like, they're communicating with themselves through me. Using human neural plasticity as a template for their own growth. Vivian laughed, a sound like chiming crystals. They're not just awakening, they're transforming. And they want to share it with everyone, human and Zach-Carey alike. Over the next few hours, as more scientists were called in to document this breakthrough, Vivian and Thales began to understand the full implications of their discovery. The Zach-Carey hadn't just built an advanced civilization, they had inadvertently created a new form of life, one that had needed humanity's unique characteristics to achieve its full potential. It's poetic, really, Vivian mused later, after the initial tests were complete. She could still feel the crystal consciousness humming at the edges of her awareness. Your people created something perfect, but it took our imperfection to make it truly alive. Talus's scales rippled with that new color that they still hadn't found a name for. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson humanity has taught us. Perfection isn't an end state, it's a process of constant growth and change. And now we can grow together, Vivian grinned, holding up a crystal that pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. Just wait until Commander Sullivan hears about this. I have a feeling the Alliance is about to evolve into something nobody expected. Speaking of evolution, Talus observed, your neural patterns have begun exhibiting quantum characteristics similar to our crystals. And my scales. She held up an arm where the iridescent patterns had begun forming complex, mathematical fractals. It seems the exchange goes both ways. Vivian's grin widened. Like I said, we're all growing together. Now, help me draft a research proposal. If I'm right about the crystalline consciousness, we're going to need a much bigger laboratory. As they worked late into the night, neither scientist noticed that the colors flowing through Talus's scales had begun synchronizing with Vivian's brainwave patterns, or that the crystals throughout the facility had started arranging themselves into structures that looked remarkably like human neural networks. The boundaries between species, between organic and crystalline, between creator and created, were beginning to blur in ways that would reshape both civilizations forever. Colonel Diana Hayes stood at the edge of the training ground on New Arcturus, watching as human and Zachary soldiers attempted to work together in their first joint combat exercise. The results were, to put it diplomatically, mixed. Your warriors are letting their weapons guide them again, Commander Vexus observed, his crystalline armor pulsing with patterns that matched Dr. Cole's recent discoveries. And my soldiers are still trying to follow traditional combat forms. Old habits, Diana replied, wincing as a human sergeant tried to mimic a Zachary defensive stance and nearly dislocated his shoulder. Though some habits are harder to break than others. The training ground was a mess of frustrated soldiers from both species. The humans, used to improvising and adapting on the fly, kept throwing off the Zachari's carefully choreographed unit movements. Meanwhile, the Zachari's enhanced strength and crystalline armor made human close combat techniques nearly useless. Perhaps, Vexus said slowly, his scales shifting thoughtfully, we are approaching this from the wrong direction. We're trying to teach each species to fight like the other. Diana turned to look at her counterpart, noting how his armor's patterns seemed to respond to her attention. Ever since Dr. Cole's breakthrough with the crystalline consciousness, the integration of human and Zachary technology had accelerated dramatically. What are you suggesting? Watch them, Vexus gestured to the training ground. Even in failure, they're creating something new. Look there. Diana followed his gaze to where a human corporal named Jensen had given up trying to match his Zachary partner's strength and was instead using it to amplify his own movements. The Zachary soldier, in turn, had abandoned their traditional forms and was flowing with Jensen's improvisation. They're not fighting like humans or Zachary, Diana realized. They're creating their own style. Exactly. Vexus's armor pulsed brighter. Just as the crystals needed human chaos to evolve, perhaps our military forces need to stop trying to conform to either species' doctrine and instead let them find their own way, Diana finished. She grabbed her comm unit. All units, cease current exercise. New parameters incoming. The soldiers gathered, humans and Zachary alike showing signs of fatigue and frustration. Diana stepped forward, feeling Vexus's reassuring presence at her side. All right, everyone, we've been doing this wrong, she announced. Stop trying to fight like humans. Stop trying to fight like Zachary. Instead, I want you to look at your partner and figure out how you can complement each other. Ma'am. Jensen stepped forward. You mean like what Richards and Kestai were doing with the gravity assists? Diana nodded. A human and Zachary pair had discovered that by timing their movements with the facility's artificial gravity fluctuations, they could achieve maneuvers that should have been physically impossible. Exactly. You all have strengths the other species lacks, and weaknesses they can cover. Stop fighting against those differences and start using them. Vexus moved among his troops, his armor's crystalline patterns creating subtle harmonics that seemed to resonate with their own. Remember the lesson of the awakened crystals. Perfection isn't about achieving a final, unchanging form. It's about constant evolution. The change in the training sessions was immediate and stunning. Freed from trying to conform to either species' combat doctrine, the soldiers began experimenting. Human adaptability merged with Zach-Carey precision. Crystal technology synchronized with human neural patterns. Within hours, the training ground had transformed into something that looked more like a dance studio than a military facility. Humans used their smaller size and greater agility to create openings that their Zach-Carey partners could exploit with their superior strength. Zach-Carey crystalline armor began adapting in real time to human brainwave patterns, creating synchronized defensive formations that neither species could have achieved alone. "Look at that," Diana breathed, watching as Jensen and his partner Krautex executed a combination move that sent them spinning through 3 dimensions, their weapons and armor working in perfect harmony. "It's beautiful." "It's evolution," Vexus replied, his scales showing that new color that had become synonymous with human Zakari cooperation. "But there's more. The crystalline consciousness, it's responding to them." He was right. The training grounds monitoring systems showed that the crystal matrices embedded throughout the facility were adapting to the soldiers' movements, learning and growing from their interactions. Each successful combination of human and Zach-Carey techniques seemed to create new patterns in the crystalline network. "We're not just creating a joint military unit," Diana realized. "We're creating a whole new way of fighting. A new way of existing." The breakthrough came during the evening session. Jensen and Krautex were attempting a particularly complex maneuver when their crystal tech suddenly synchronized completely. For a moment, they moved as one being, their movements perfectly aligned with both human instinct and Zach-Carey precision. "Did you see that?" Diana demanded, reviewing the sensor data. The neural patterns, the crystal resonance, everything just merged. Vexus's armor was pulsing with excitement. The crystalline consciousness didn't just facilitate communication between them, it created a bridge between their very ways of thinking. Human adaptability teaching Zach-Carey crystals to evolve, while Zach-Carey precision helps focus human chaos. As they watched, more pairs began achieving similar moments of perfect synchronization. Each success seemed to make the next easier, as if the crystalline network was learning and teaching simultaneously. "We need to expand this program immediately," Diana decided, already drafting reports in her mind. "Not just for military applications, this could revolutionize everything about how our species interact." "Agreed," Vexus said, his scales rippling with possibilities. "But we should proceed carefully. The Crimson Shard remnants are still out there, and this level of integration between our species would terrify them." Diana smiled grimly. "Let them be terrified. We're not just building a joint military unit anymore, Vexus. We're creating the future." Later that night, reviewing training footage in their joint command center, Diana and Vexus watched their soldiers continue to evolve. The crystalline consciousness had begun creating new formations in the training grounds architecture, responding to and encouraging the troops' innovations. "You know what this means," Diana said quietly. "Once this goes public, there's no going back. Our species will be linked in ways no one ever imagined." Vexus's armor pulsed in sync with the facility's crystal matrices. Perhaps that was always the plan. Not conquest, not mere alliance, but true synthesis. A new form of life, born from the best of both our species. As if in response, the crystals throughout the command center began pulsing with that new, unnamed color, the color of change, of evolution, of humanity and Zach-Carey together stepping into an uncertain but thrilling future. Admiral Rhea Sullivan stood on the bridge of the USS Hyperion II, watching the impossible unfold at the edge of known space. The vast anomaly before them defied conventional physics, a writhing mass of dark energy that seemed to consume light itself. But it wasn't the anomaly that had brought the combined human-Zakari fleet to this remote sector. Another transmission, Ambassador Nixis reported, her scales shifting through patterns that perfectly matched the crystalline arrays integrated throughout the ship. Same as before. Put it through, Sullivan ordered, though she already knew what they would hear. The message that filled the bridge was neither human nor Zakari. It was pure mathematical syntax, a language of quantum equations that even their most advanced AIs struggled to decode. But its meaning was clear enough: evolution or extinction. The Eternal Ones, Nixis said softly, using the name they'd given to the entities that had emerged from the anomaly 3 weeks ago. They're testing us again. Sullivan's hand found the crystal matrix embedded in her command chair, feeling the familiar resonance of the consciousness that now linked both their species. No, she corrected. They're judging us. The Eternal Ones had appeared shortly after the full integration of human and Zakari civilization. Beings of pure energy and thought, they claimed to be the guardians of evolution itself, emerging whenever a species or group of species reached a critical point in their development. Latest analysis from Dr. Cole's team, reported Captain Torres from his tactical station. His neural implants pulsed in sync with his Zakari partner's scales. The entities aren't just watching our physical evolution. They're measuring our potential for transcendence. Which explains their interest in the crystalline consciousness, Nixis added. They see it as proof that we're ready to advance beyond organic limitations. Sullivan studied the tactical display, where hundreds of human and Zakari ships moved in perfect formation. The fleet had evolved beyond either species' traditional doctrine, creating new strategies that combined human intuition with Zakari precision. Even now, the crystalline networks were adapting, learning, growing. They're wrong, Sullivan said finally. We're not ready to transcend our physical forms. We're just learning how to truly inhabit them. As if in response to her words, the anomaly pulsed, sending waves of dark energy through space. The Eternal One's message repeated, more insistent this time: join us in transcendence, or face the consequences of stagnation. Admiral, Torres called out, energy spike. They're trying to force the issue. The dark energy wave that hit the fleet should have torn their ships apart. But the crystalline consciousness reacted instantly, creating quantum human adaptability merged with Zakari precision, organic minds working in perfect harmony with crystalline networks. Fascinating, Nixis observed, her scales rippling with that unique color that now represented the merger of their species. They expected us to either ascend to their level or be destroyed. They never considered we might choose a third path. Sullivan smiled grimly. That's their weakness. They've transcended physical form, but they've lost the ability to truly evolve. They can only see forward, never sideways. The Eternal Ones attacked again, this time targeting the crystalline consciousness itself. But what they found there surprised them. Instead of a simple network seeking ascension, they encountered something new, a hybrid consciousness that combined human chaos with Zakari order, organic growth with crystalline precision. All ships, execute protocol synthesis, Sullivan commanded. Show them what real evolution looks like. The fleet moved as one organism, human and Zakari crews working in perfect synchronization. The crystalline consciousness spread through their ships like a neural network, turning their combined fleet into something greater than the sum of its parts. They didn't fight against the dark energy, they adapted to it, learned from it, reshaped it. They're trying to communicate again, Nixis reported, her scales pulsing with complex mathematical patterns. But something's different. They're confused. The Eternal Ones had encountered countless civilizations over the eons, but never one that refused transcendence in favor of continued evolution. The very concept challenged their fundamental assumptions about the nature of progress. Send them our response, Sullivan ordered. The one we prepared. The message they transmitted wasn't just in mathematical syntax. It contained the full history of human and Zakari cooperation, the fear, the conflict, the understanding, and finally the synthesis. It showed how two radically different species had found strength not in transcending their differences, but in combining them in new and unexpected ways. The anomaly's dark energy patterns shifted, taking on aspects of the crystalline consciousness as quantum signatures. The Eternal Ones were adapting, something they hadn't done in millions of years. They're learning from us, Torres realized, watching the tactical displays. Just as we learn from each other. Of course they are, Sullivan smiled. That's what happens when you encounter humanity. You either adapt, or you get left behind. The final exchange between the fleet and the Eternal Ones lasted hours, a complex dialogue of energy patterns, quantum mathematics, and evolutionary theory. In the end, the ancient entities retreated not in defeat, but in contemplation. They had come to teach transcendence and instead had been taught about the power of continuous evolution. As the anomaly faded from normal space, Sullivan turned to Nixis. Think we'll see them again? The ambassador's scales shifted through colors both old and new. Perhaps. But when they return, they won't be the same. Just as we aren't the same as when we first met. Sullivan looked around the bridge, where humans and Zachary worked seamlessly together, their differences becoming their greatest strengths. The crystalline consciousness hummed through the ship, not as a tool or even a separate entity, but as an integral part of their combined existence. You know what this means, she said. Other ancient species will come, expecting us to either transcend or submit. Let them come, Nixis replied, her scales showing that unique color that represented their shared future. We'll teach them what we've learned, that true evolution isn't about becoming pure energy or pure thought. It's about becoming more of what you already are, together. As the fleet set course for home, Sullivan reflected on how far they'd come. From enemies to allies to something entirely new, humanity and the Zachary had created a third path, not up toward transcendence or down toward stagnation, but forward into continuous evolution. The crystalline consciousness pulsed with new patterns, already incorporating lessons learned from the encounter with the Eternal Ones. Humanity's chaos and the Zachari's order had combined to create something the universe had never seen before, a civilization that viewed evolution not as a path to some final, perfect state, but as an endless journey of growth and change.